He keeps himself in trim by bending bars of iron. This bar is the genuine article which we tested before he began to play with it.
Beyond the bend, beyond the bend.
All right, guys, thanks for supporting the show. I got a list of sponsors here. So first off, we got Harito Bending, harito-bending.com. You're going to use promo code CHEERS for 10% off. And a portion of that sale is going to come back to support the show. So I appreciate that. You know, everybody wants to be on the Harito cert list. I haven't heard a bad thing about the quality of his bolts. I can personally say that they're the same every time. Some really hard bolts on there. You got certs for every style, including snapping. He's also got wraps and t-shirts on there. So definitely hit up haritobending.com and use the promo code CHEERS. Next, we got Jed Johnson's nail bending ebook. If you want to check this ebook out, if you're a beginner, message me for the link, because if you use this link, a portion of that sale is going to come back to support the show. We also have the Grappito Trainer. This is an all-in-one grip training tool. If you use promo code Beyond the Bend, you're going to save 15% off of a sale of $90 or more. We also have Gil, former guest, barrelstrengthsystems.com. Use promo code Beyond for 10% off. Gil's got a ton of cool stuff on there, including the flask. This is a pinch device. If you can do a body weight pull-up on this thing, you're going to get on a roster. I think that's pretty cool. All right. Lastly, we have Hard Life Fightwear. That's hardlifefightwear.com or .co.uk. If you want some rash guards or something like that for jiu-jitsu, they also got a bunch of other cool t-shirts on there. You're going to use promo code Beyond the Bend for 15% off. Also, if you want to get on a roster, an unofficial roster, hit up at Eat Chalk Get Big on Instagram. If you bent a 80D unbraced or two 60Ds taped together unbraced, you're going to get on an unofficial roster. The other thing is, if you snapped a horseshoe, I don't need a video. I'm keeping track of people who've snapped horseshoes just because it's a cool thing to do. If you've also snapped one into 3 pieces, hit me up. Or if you've snapped one laying down, there's only 2 people on that list, so get on it. Last thing, a couple new things coming up. I'm going to be putting out a feat of the week. This isn't really a challenge, more than just like something cool to do week by week. It's going to be just like some athletic stuff mixed with some bending and snapping. So I'm going to be putting that out, and the only way to participate is just to do it and then tag me in the post and throw it up on Instagram or Facebook. The other thing is, every month I'm going to be doing a monthly challenge. We've had some really good participation lately. I want to keep that going. I have some really cool things planned. So I really appreciate everybody's support, and looking forward to another good year. All right, thanks.
All right. Break out the vegan donuts, turn up the misfits, grab some kettlebells. We got Scott Shetler in the house. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thanks, man. It's awesome to be on here with you.
So a little background about Scott. Scott probably saved my life, because when we got locked down here in New York, I had heard him on Grappling Central podcast, and I knew he was a similar kind of guy as far as growing up listening to punk and hardcore, and he was a trainer. So I hit him up for a remote program. He included some plate pinching into that, and that's what sent me down this spiral of grip training and bending. So thanks for that, and welcome, man.
Dude, thanks, man. It's really really awesome to be on here talking with you, and it's crazy to see how far you've come since we started working together online back at the beginning of the year too. So
yeah, it was definitely the savior. And just like anything, and maybe you're the same way, is like, as soon as I discovered like what was grip training, everything prior to you teaching me about plate pinching, I just knew about like plastic grippers, like,
right.
So just being someone that goes backwards with things. And I'm sure this is because of like growing up and getting into bands and figuring out what bands they were influenced by. as soon as I figured out the world of grip sport, I wanted to know everything there was to know about it. And then that's what led me down the road of steel bending. Has that been the same experience for you when you get into stuff?
Yeah, man. And it's like I got in, I dabbled in gripping, you know, and I never dove all in, but I always thought that stuff was cool because it's like, you know, it kind of goes back to our punk rock kind of roots, you know, just to take it back a little bit, in 2009, we had the first ever kettlebell sport competition at the Arnold Classic. Not the first ever kettlebells, but at the Arnold Classic, it was the first. And at the time, I was still powerlifting, and I was training with Valery Fedorenko back then was my coach, and we were actually, it was weird because I emceed the competition, but then I also competed in the long cycle division. And so it was kind of a big deal. And I spent 2 months just getting ready to compete because I'm like, man, I've always wanted to compete at the Arnold. Obviously, like bodybuilding, never going to happen, you know, powerlifting, no. So that was my way to compete at the Arnold. And my buddy Eric, who was the guitarist in the band, this metal band that I played in when I was college, he came down to watch the competition. And it was really cool because I just remember he's a pretty eccentric guy. And he was like, dude, he goes, kettlebell lifters are like the punk rockers of the strength world, you know. And I'm like, man, it's really true, you know. They're like they're not the bodybuilders, they're not the, you know, they're not the strength, you know, the power lifters or the strongmen. They're these weird little misfits. And it was really awesome. And it's like, in a way, like the grip community is kind of like that too, because it's more this like underground, you know, tighter circles, more, I mean, yeah, I mean, you could probably speak to it better than I could because, you know, look how much you've gotten into it in such a short period of time. Everybody pretty much knows everybody, you know, I mean, it's a really
Definitely
tight knit
small.
community. Yeah. So it kind of reminds me of, you know, kind of that punk rock, you know, that kind of hardcore vibe or whatever. And it's just like, it's its own little faction of the strength world. But, you know, you know, through the kettlebell community, I met people like Andrew Derniad. I met some, you know, strongman competitors, Brian Schoonfeld and some other people who, you know, are into the grip stuff. The Gillinghams were always, you know, around our booth, you know, the American Kettlebell Club's booth at the Arnold. So there was always this crossover between powerlifting and kettlebell sport and grip. So even if you weren't getting into, like, Andrew got really hardcore into gripping, like, you know, he competed and all that stuff. But even if you didn't get into the competition on some level, you got into the grip training because we were all reading Iron Mind, you know, we were all reading Milo. We all took a stab at the nails. We, you know, got the gripping devices, the rolling, you know, everybody's got a rolling thunder. Everybody's got a hub lift. Everybody's, you know, everybody got some COC grippers. So even if you never wanted to get on the roster or whatever, you ended up training in some capacity. And, you know, with working with you, you know, being jiu-jitsu, I always like to include a little bit of direct grip work for the jiu-jitsu athletes that I work with, just because grip is such a huge part of the sport. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So what years was that going on when you said like everybody was doing a little bit of grippers, a little bit of nails and
Oh,
stuff?
it's always been like that, but like,
Okay.
you know, my exposure to it was more through the powerlifting and kettlebell community. You know, for me, I was really getting into that community between like oh 04, 05, somewhere around there. And then, you know, through about 2010, you know, I mean,
Okay.
so about those 5-6 years was when, you know, we really started looking at auxiliary, you know, and we bought John
Yeah.
Brookfield's books and things like that. And I actually, I was writing for Fight Magazine back then, which was a great magazine. I was
I
training
remember it.
yeah, it was a good magazine. I was training the editor in chief at the time, Donovan, and the senior designer, Ryan. She and her husband, Brian, trained with me at the gym. So as I was writing for Fight, he was getting really into battling ropes, and he's like,
Yeah.
"Is there any way you do an article?" And I said, "Well, you know, I know the guy that kind of created this. You know, it's John Britton." And they're like, "Who?" Because John is the most underrated guy in strength, and because he's such a humble guy,
Yeah.
and his system has been ripped off by so many people, and nobody gives him credit for developing the battling ropes and the battling chains and all that stuff. So I thought, you know, here's a chance to give credit where credit's due. So I got to interview. I contacted John. I'm like, hey, would you want to do this article for Fight Magazine with me? So I got to talk to him for like 2 hours on the phone, and yeah, it was just really cool. So it was my exposure through powerlifting and kettlebells that kind of got me into what little grip stuff that I've been exposed to. And again, I
Yeah.
didn't take it as far as you have, but, you know, I really got into hub lifting for a minute. You know, I like to play with the rolling thunder, you know, mess around with the COC grippers and stuff. And I
Yeah.
just think there's a lot of value in direct grip training for everybody.
Oh, definitely. And so the way I start the show always is, do you remember the first time you saw someone bend a piece of steel, whether it was on TV or in person?
I don't, because I'm sure, being a kid growing up in the 80s and stuff, there was probably some weird like Wide World of Sports thing that was
Yeah.
on, and Bill Kazmaier was probably bending steel over his head. So I'm sure that, I'd always known about like the circus strongmen, the stunt, type people, and the sideshow types. And there's always some sort of steel bending going on there and stuff. But as far as like legitimately being exposed to it, I would say it's when I got turned on to like John Brookfield through like Iron Mind and stuff. So
Gotcha. Yeah. The old time strongmen, like the what you just mentioned, like the turn of the century stuff. That's like why I think all this is so interesting, and in my mind, it really fits together. Even though maybe to someone from the outside looking in, being like, "Oh, the guy was into jujitsu and now he's into bending nails," like that's pretty bizarre. But the fact that all those old time strongmen were doing feats of strength, they were grappling, they were
yep.
like into lifting, they were just like into the physical culture, and they were doing all these things, like,
Yes.
so it's all part of it if you know enough to realize that.
If you take it back that far, and unfortunately, that's one of the things that I'm probably most I don't want to say I mean, everything evolves, and the deeper things get, the more specialized things get.
Yep.
But the thing that I hate is we lose a sense of the history of physical culture and what it really was. And I think, like, unless you're a competitor, unless you're trying to compete at the highest professional levels in like weightlifting or powerlifting or whatever, I think like the approach that was the real physical culture movement, from that turn of the century, is probably one of the healthiest endeavors that anybody can be involved in, because it stems so far outside of just the physical. If you read those, if you can get your hands on any of those books and those old manuals and stuff like that, these guys were incredibly literate. They were intelligent men. They're very thoughtful men. It wasn't just, hey, bro, add 50 pounds to your bench with this, program.
Right.
It really like encompassed the development of the entire human, the entire biological organism. And it wasn't just so specialized,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and the things that we've sacrificed for the 1,000-pound benches and the 1,200-pound squats and the 1,100-pound deadlifts. I mean, that stuff is awesome. But the stuff that we sacrifice to get there, I believe, gets us further away from what the founding fathers of physical culture intended.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool, actually. I like that. Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense, too. It's just like being well-rounded as an individual. Like that's ultimately, especially as we get older, like this,
Yeah.
like I can't tell you how many of like elite trainers that I've spoke to now, like, are just talking up walking. You know what I mean? They're just
Yeah.
like, yeah, make sure you're
Right.
getting out and taking your walks. Like David
Yeah.
Horn is always talking about walking. Like it's just like it's so like interesting that these like things that might even be taken for granted are like could be paramount in just like being overall healthy in a physical way.
Yeah. It's important stuff, man.
So take me back to your beginning. Like, did you grow up playing sports, and
Uh,
how did everything evolve from there?
I grew up in like kind of small town Ohio, small town called Austinburg, Geneva on the Lake. It's about 30 minutes west of Erie, PA, right on I-90, right on Lake Erie, about 40 minutes east of Cleveland or so. So there really wasn't a lot going on. I mean, I did the typical, when I was a kid, my parents exposed me to a bunch of different sports, little league basketball, flag football, little league football, baseball, t-ball, and then baseball. And I actually excelled at baseball. I was a really good pitcher. But, we're talking like, 10, 11, 12 years old. But at the time, I was throwing really well. I had good accuracy, I had good speed and stuff like that. But again, we didn't have strength coaches. We didn't have trainers. My dad was a cop, man. He wasn't a workout dude. So I didn't have a weight set growing up and stuff like that. Anytime I wanted to try to lift, it was grab a milk jug and try to do some curls or something stupid or push-ups or whatever. So there was this, just keep throwing hard, well, that screwed up a bunch of ligaments in my elbow. And
Yeah.
suddenly, for some reason, I got all this elbow pain. I can't throw. my mom's a nurse. Oh, let's take you to the clinic. Let's get you some drugs, and it was, and it's not their fault. They just don't know, so now you're cashed in and suddenly baseball's not fun anymore. And I was always into, I always like martial arts. So the minute I could start doing Taekwondo, which was about the most legit, martial arts school in my area, actually had a really good instructor who was a pretty high level point fighter, but he was a student of Billy Blank's. And they traveled the world competing. This is long before Taibo, and Billy was actually a hardcore Taekwondo practitioner. And when our sensei, Jim Hardy, he would tell us about the training sessions in Billy's basement in Erie, PA. Dude, you're talking 2, 3, 4 hours. Guys are showing up in combat boots to spar because, it was like, spar with what you came in.
Yeah.
They sparred full contact, man. I mean, my instructor, when he told us during his black belt test, he had to hold a horse stance for like 20 minutes with Billy standing on his thighs. Billy's a big dude. He's like 6'1", 6'2", he's pretty muscular. So, I mean, it wasn't like the kind of the McDojos nowadays where it's like, hey, we're going to get you, like my instructor didn't believe in a junior black belt, so, and it was a very competition heavy school. So I am thankful that those couple years I spent studying Taekwondo, I mean, we did an hour of physical conditioning and then we did an hour of martial arts training. And it was like legit hardcore old school Taekwondo. And it was a lot of fun, so I always gravitated to those solo endeavors, so I got into skateboarding and BMX. All that stuff appealed to me. Wanted to surf so bad, but it's like, come on, man. I'm in Ohio, actually got into bodyboarding, which you could surf on Lake Erie, but you had to be willing to go out when it was freaking cold, when a bad storm was coming through, and throw on a wetsuit. And, so, I mean, it was anything that I could do to stay on that kind of punk rock fringe. And I got really into vert BMX. Did some freestyle competitions and stuff. Really loved that. Liked skateboarding way more than I was good and gifted at it. And, got into snowboarding and bodyboarding. And those were like my main things, throughout high school. I was the dork in band. I was a drummer, loved music. I was the skinny band dork, I mean, that was me through high school until I joined the Navy and got the hell out of Dodge. And, didn't really get into lifting until probably my junior year because I was sick of being the skinny kid. Laughed at, I have to credit my girlfriend at the time, Stephanie, who I remember at the end of 10th grade, we were standing in the lunchroom and she was talking to her friend Erica, who was a few years older, and they were both cheerleaders. And they were kind of covering their mouth, whispering to each other. And they started laughing and pointing at my legs, and I was like, what the hell, So as we were walking from lunch to our next class, I said, well, what's so funny? She goes, well, Erica pointed out how when you stand with your legs together, your thighs don't touch, you're really skinny. And I was like mortified. I went home, I grabbed my Spider-Man comics. I ordered the Weeder training kits out of the back. And that's really what started it all, man. I started doing these at home workouts. And then the minute I could convince my mom to buy me a membership over at the Y, started going there and lifting. Unguided. Sometimes the older guys would have a little bit of mercy on me and they'd give me some tips, but that's what started it all, man. And it was very, it was that late 80s, early 90s bodybuilding thing, the Mr. Olympia was on ESPN. You're buying all the bodybuilding magazines. You still believe that, the Flex article about how you do 40 sets of 20 reps in the squat is how Dorian Yates built his legs and all, which we know is completely false, But that's what started it all, man. It was just that kind of love for the bodybuilding community, which I kind of got into that because it was a very kind of a misfit, almost punk rock thing back then,
Yeah. That's cool, man. Yeah, like I think I definitely relate with the solo endeavor stuff. I can remember like playing soccer, right? Like in high school or something. It was ninth grade because I've said before on the show, ninth grade was the hard cutoff. That was like too many shows to go to, too much skateboarding to happen. Like these sports and this practicing every night, this isn't going to fly with like what I've got going on. So I do regret it now, but that's when everything got pushed to the side to go skate and go to shows. But so I remember like having a game where we won and I don't even know if I like touched the ball, I was like, damn, I don't feel any glory in this, and it was just
didn't
like
contribute,
And then like when I got into jiu-jitsu or specifically like bending and lifting stuff, it's like that the glory is all yours and the pain of losing is all yours too, man. Like it's like, and I love that about it. Like, but it's also hard, like
Yeah.
but that's like I was saying to my son the other day, because he hasn't competed yet in jiu-jitsu. He actually just competed in David Horn's steel shredder,
Oh,
which was
cool.
really cool. So did some nail snapping and stuff like that. But he's just, and I'm trying to like explain to him that, yeah, you might win and it'll be great, but you might lose too. And the chance of losing is just the cost. Like, everything has a cost. And it's like, but it'll be all right if you lose. And then there'll be a time when you win and it'll be great. It's just like, I think some people are turned away by bearing all of that on your shoulders, but for me, I was just always like, even something like tennis, right? Like, or any other sport where it's just one person out there. I was like, oh, I can
Yeah.
get into that. I understand that.
It's
Like,
awesome. Yeah.
it's like, I think it's a special kind of person. I think that as we talk, it's just all this stuff kind of like gets threaded together. It's just like a certain mindset you have to just like want to do it yourself. And like, just when the first time you see a grip implement or a piece of steel or some weights, right? You see someone lift it, you go, I wonder if I could do that,
Yeah. Yeah. It's I don't know if you've gotten into like stone lifting yet and really started like researching, it that really kind of parallels the grip community, and especially through like things like Iron Mind and stuff like that. And there was a guy who I'm very fortunate to have met, Ethan Reeve, who is I think he still is the head strength coach over at Wake Forest. He used to put on these, and he may still do these. I don't know. I've lost touch with the community, but back in like '05, he started doing these strength coaches clinics. And I mean, it was like $50, and in the first year he did it. I mean, check out this lineup. It was Pavel Tatulin with a couple of his top instructors at the time. It was Louis Simmons. It was Gail Hatch, the weightlifting coach. It was Bud Charnega from, the Sportivny Press. He's the one that translated all those Russian manuals that you hear Louis talking about and stuff like that. It was Ethan himself. I mean, it's like a who's who of the best in powerlifting, kettlebell lifting, And then one of the later years, I think it was the year that John Brookfield debuted the battling rope system. I think that would have been '07, '06 or '07. A guy by the name of Steve Jeck was there, and Steve was one of the most powerful presentations I've ever seen. And he was a thrower at App State. And then he was living in North Carolina, not far from, he was colleagues with John. If you read John's books, you'll see pictures of Steve in there doing some of the grip stuff. Steve's just this big burly guy with a beard, looks like a lumberjack. He wrote a column for Iron Mind. He had a regular article in Milo magazine, and stone lifting became his thing. And as a thrower, when he went to compete in the Highland Games in Scotland, he learned of this custom of Clockqueed Fear, which is the manhood stones. And that caused him to meet this guy named Peter Martin, who was a historian of the stones in Scotland. And Steve wrote these amazing books and put out these videos, and through Milo and Iron Mind really educated people. And he was an incredibly well-written, well-spoken guy. And he was this massive, like 280-pound beast. But, stone lifting, like the metaphors that he would draw with it and stuff like that kind of stuff, like you said about the grips, like the stones, it just like, you either lift it or you don't, and like a lot of these stones, if you travel to lift like to Iceland or to Scotland to lift these stones, there's no fanfare, dude. Maybe with the Denny stones, because they have a big festival and they're in a really like a pretty easy to get to place. But like if you go to lift the pen slab, the Fiahellen stone in Iceland, you're going out to this goat pen in the middle of nowhere. There's nobody there to slap you on the back and stuff. It's like Steve used to say, the only adulation you'll get is from the squirrels and the millipedes. And I like that, because there's this it's this intrinsic pursuit. You don't have to do it for anybody else. It's something, for you. And it's like, either you lift it or you don't. Nobody's going to sit there and say, well, he didn't break depth on that squat, or the judge should have given a red light, or they argue, they debate on it. There's no competition. There's no points. You either do it or you don't, and when you do it, you're truly wrapping your arms and your hands around a piece of history. And it was just, it's really cool. And that's the kind of stuff in the community that I love that kind of stuff, man. I
Yeah.
love that kind of stuff.
It was coming up on a recent episode that I feel like most of this stuff was probably just out of like, I don't know if necessity is the right word, but like,
Yeah.
maybe obviously the first stones that were lifted were just like two farmers like, hey, you think you can lift that? Yeah, probably. And
Right.
like maybe the first person to bend a bar of steel was like working on something, and they're like, hey, you think you could do that again? And it's just like something so natural about that, like I think that
Yeah.
people can relate to and respect.
Well, that was the test, in the Scottish, like the Highlands, the clans and stuff like that. A boy became a man. His test for manhood was when he could pick his clan stone up and set it on the wall, or if it was a pudding stone, when he could throw it a certain distance. These were the tests that they defined your manhood. They were your tests. As a boy became a man, and that's where you see in strongman competition the Atlas stones, where they pick up the stone and they set it on the wall. That came from that era, in Scotland. So it's really cool. There's this whole history behind it that gets overlooked, for these younger kids and these younger people that are just getting into the sport and the disciplines and stuff.
Yeah, it's really cool. I've definitely researched a little bit. It's certainly something I foresee myself getting heavier into as time
You'll like
goes
it.
on.
And
And
definitely try to dig up anything you can on Steve Jack. He
okay,
unfortunately passed away in the last couple of years of, young guy, 50. He was in his 50s, got really aggressive pancreatic cancer, and it was a real loss because his contributions to the community, so underrated. It
wow,
can't be overstated how important of a guy he was, and just didn't get enough. You know, we know a lot of people like that, whether it's the martial arts or whether it's the strength community or whatever. There's some people out there that just don't get the notoriety because they don't go out seeking it, but they
yeah,
really deserve it.
definitely
He's one of those guys whose legacy really needs to be remembered.
cool. I'm gonna look that up for sure. So you kind of touched on it, and it comes up every show. It's a staple of the show, but it's just so we're talking about stone lifting, and it's you kind of mentioned about depth and form, and so something paramount to bending and grip and everything is just the idea of seeking functional strength, right? And like it has
Mhm.
all so many names of old man strength,
Yeah.
like you know farm
Farm boy
strength,
strength. Yeah.
yeah. But so I'd like to hear that from you, from your perspective as a trainer. Like, what are we talking about when we talk? Because it's like I don't think it's linear in the sense of like just picking up the weight, right, with perfect
Yeah.
form. It's something outside the lines of like perfect form, where it's like if your kid's falling all over and you
Yeah.
snatch them up one-handed, like.
Yeah.
So break that down for me. I just like hearing everybody's different takes on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's technique as it relates to your traditional your standard barbell lifts, the classical lifts and things like that. Obviously we would never suggest somebody squat, with a rounded back
Right.
or a bad knee position or something like that. There's definitely technical aspects of the lifts that we maintain for safety and for optimal strength. But I do think, like, if you take a sport like jujitsu or wrestling or grappling sports, there's also this idea of imperfection, that we're often in contraindicated positions. When somebody's cranking on your neck and they have your arm extended over your head and they're trying to do an arm triangle or something, your shoulder's in a really weak, compromised position, and you might be trying to fight out of that position to recover. You're not in these optimal positions. Your spine's twisted and bent weird, which we would never encourage with lifting and things like that. So I don't know, with regard to training, um, if there's ever a case where you want to purposely put yourself into an imperfect position or bad technique. But I would say that training end ranges of motion, training full ranges of motion, complete and full lockouts and things like that is essential. Just because you've got to press and pull from really weird positions in a sport like grappling. So if you're going to do a shoulder press, you're not bringing that bar down to your nose and just putting it over your head. You're going to bring that all the way down to your collarbone. You're going to lock it out all the way overhead. You want to work the shoulders, the elbows through a full range of motion, because those are the positions that you're going to be in, in grappling and things like that. So I think, from a safety, standpoint, we want to maintain optimal technique when we're doing the lifts and never sacrifice that technique. The only exception that I would make is like in powerlifting competition, when you're pulling a max deadlift, nobody's got a perfectly arched back. The back's round,
Yeah.
squats, you might get out of the groove or something like that, but you're going to fight to try to make that lift, but when it comes to training, when it comes to the development of strength, I think we need to adhere to proper technique, when we're executing the lifts, just for safety and optimal strength and structure. So
How about in the develop? So if someone's seeking what we're calling functional strength, farm strength, what are some things that they should be incorporating in? Because obviously you and I both know, like, the guy that looks like he's just benched his whole life or whatever isn't necessarily the strongest guy on the mat,
no. I worry about the guys with big hamstrings, big butts, big backs, big
Yeah.
forearms.
Yeah.
Those are the scary guys. A guy with a big chest just means maybe he can bump you out of side control easy or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think the bench press does get a bad rap because it's the most non-functional of the lifts or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, the bench press is a great upper body strength and mass developer. And I think the core 4 lifts, the squat, the overhead press, the bench, the deadlift, are 4 of the best lifts that should be the foundation of any strength program. I think when you're talking about usable strength, though, we got to get into things like loaded carries. We got to get into torso strength. The way that we're going to use it, grip, is so important. Having that's why I think everybody should do, just the nature of jujitsu. We have pretty strong grip as it is, especially if you do, well, I don't know, people say gi because you're using the gi, but I almost think like, no gi is really more challenging on grip, because you don't have the aid of grabbing material.
I agree.
So grapplers usually have some pretty strong grips to begin with, just from the nature of their sport and their training. But I do think that some direct, we should spend a little bit of our time, even without getting, if you want to get, dive all in like you have, great. But even if you don't become a total grip enthusiast, a couple days a week at the end of a session, there's nothing wrong with taking 5-10 minutes and doing some direct grip work. I think it enhances hand health and strength,
Yeah. Yeah.
So don't neglect like the loaded carries, the sled drags, the sled pushes, farmer carries. That's real. When you talk about farm boy strength, look at what they're doing. Look at the type of labor they're doing all day. The chopping motions with a pitchfork or a shovel, or swinging an axe or something like that. That's, you want to talk about torso development. That's real functional torso development.
Definitely. What's something that's interesting too that fits into what we're talking about is my friend Josh Goldthorpe at Chuck and Canuck on Instagram, who's been just on a tear this year. Bend, like, people pretty much say they've never seen anybody bending what he's bent in as short of a time, and he's a pro thrower for the Highland Games and stuff. And he made this great point when he was on, saying that bending, we're not using the belly of the muscle, right? Like, meaning like center mass. And I don't know enough anatomy to know if this is true, but the in my mind it makes sense. And so he's saying, like, we're basically going to the point where our muscles are maxed and then somehow pushing through, right? And then
Yeah.
this reminds me of jujitsu, in the sense, it clicked that night when he said it, was like, jujitsu uses a lot of that, what I'm going to call tendon strength. I don't know if that's accurate,
Yeah.
but like, say you're fully extended on arm bar, but you're not ready to tap, and you're going to just tense that up just a little bit so you can hitchhike out of there, or get your grip back and fight. So what's good for that type? What do you call that type of strength? And two, how do we develop it? Because that's certainly, I mean, bending is all that. That's getting to the point where you've already maxed yourself out, and then somehow pushing past that limit.
Think how bad your joints feel, when you do stuff like that. Like, you feel it in your elbows, you feel it in the shoulder, and you don't feel it in the muscle. It's not like you did a set of 10 in the bench press and you got to pump. You
Right.
get this deep ache in the joints, like in the shoulders and the elbows. And you often have, at least, from my experience in jiu-jitsu, a lot of the pain that you have, it's in the joints like that, because you're using that same sort of tension. So there's a couple factors that you have to address. One is training those end ranges of motion. You've got to work full extensions on your presses. You've got to work full and complete lockouts. You have to do that because of the angles. Like you said, when you're in an arm bar and your arm's totally extended and you've got that second where you can get out of it and you might have to tense up. So you're completely flexing all that tissue in a complete extension in a weak position. We're strong when we're in close. Out here, we're not strong. So we're flexing, we're putting the muscles under a tremendous amount of force. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to train the body in extension. So I think some of the most overlooked forms of training are things like isometrics. And isometrics are, you can create massive amounts of force. They translate well to bending, I would think, because you're not just, unless you're doing something really light, you're not just bending it, you're creating a lot of tension before it starts to give. So bending is a quasi isometric. So training isometrics, I think, is very important. It's talked about, a lot back in the old time trainers and stuff like that. Bob Hoffman, that's why he built the power racks with the pins, so that you could pull the bar into pins and press the bar into pins, so that you could do those isometrics. And if you know anything about isometrics, the strength gain radiates 10 to 15 degrees on either side of the position that you're training. Okay. So if you're doing isometrics, like say for the deadlift, you want to make sure you're using 4 or 5, maybe 6 different positions, so that you're covering the complete range of motion, because you're only building strength 10 to 15 degrees on either side of that sticking point that you're working. But isometrics are a tremendous way to build strength, in those same types of capacities, because, when somebody's got your arm locked and you're flexing that bicep and you're trying to keep them from breaking the elbow, you're doing an isometric curl. There's no tissue glide there. They're holding your arm. So you're contracting your bicep isometrically. So it's putting a tremendous amount of strain on the bicep tendon over the elbow. Plus you got the torque on the elbow joint from the guy that's trying to break it. So our joints are definitely at risk for injury. And that's probably one of the most common non-catastrophic injuries are these minor joint, twinges that might keep us out of training for a day or two, or, whatever. So I think joint integrity is really, really important. In addition to isometrics, really, really heavy lockouts and supports are great for building joint strength and integrity. And then the other thing is really, really high repetition exercises that don't focus on the eccentric phase of the lift are fantastic for building joint health and joint integrity. So for instance, like something for your elbows that you could do. And I have a lot of guys I work with do this. And I got to say, all credit to Louis Simmons from Westside Barbell for turning me onto this, because he's a big proponent of this type of training. But he said that the stuff that he uncovered through some of his research in some of the Russian manuals and things like that, I think Comey's book actually was one that talked about the really high reps, but really, really high repetition isolation exercises for the joints. So for instance, if you want to get some work on the elbow, and really shore up that tricep tendon, which, we get bursitis all the time in the elbows. We always have a lot of pain, from framing and, pushing people off of us and stuff like that. One of the things that you can do to really increase the resilience of the elbow is you take a band, like a jump stretch band or whatever, and you throw it over the top of a power rack or choking on a pull-up bar, and you do high repetition push downs. But you're not trying to get a pump in the muscle. What you're trying to do is, so you don't want to use a slow eccentric, we want to focus on the joint. So the really high repetitions are going to pump a lot of circulation and a lot of fluid into the muscle and eventually the connective tissues. Now, if connective tissues like tendons and ligaments have a very poor blood supply. That's like you get a partial tear in your bicep. It heals very quickly, 3 to 5 days, maybe 7 days, some ice and, rest or whatever. And it's, some light movement and it's good to go, because you get a lot of blood flow into the muscular tissue. The tendons take a little bit longer to heal because they don't have as good of a blood flow as the muscle. Ligaments are even worse. They have poor blood flow. So in order to get a lot of blood flow to those tissues, we use really high reps to pump that circulation into those connective tissues. If I just do a set of 5 extensions, I'm going to affect my tricep muscle. But if I really want to get down into those tendons and the integrity of that joint through the connective tissues, if I do really high repetitions on the push down in a fairly quick clip, and I think the recommendation is like a minimum of 30 to 50 reps per set, But we do 2, 3, sometimes 400 repetitions in a workout, but that increased blood flow thickens up the tendons and the connective tissue and makes the joint really strong and resilient. You know, put it to you like this. It's very common in bodybuilding. You hear about these guys tearing their pec off or tearing their bicep off or tearing their quad off. And the most common thing is, well, they're using anabolics. The muscle gets so much bigger and stronger. The tendon hasn't caught up, right? Okay. Well, if we take that logic, then the guys at Westside Barbell should be tearing pecs and triceps and quads off left and right because they're benching 800, 900, 1,000 pounds. They're squatting 1,000, 1,100 pounds. They're deadlifting 800, 900 pounds. They don't have those injuries like you see with bodybuilders, and they're handling way heavier weights. What's the difference? You know, they're on as much gear, you know, they're open about their drug use. So it's not the anabolics. It's the fact that Louis makes sure that they do that joint integrity work to strengthen up the tendons and the ligaments and stuff like that. You know, because these guys should be, you know, they get tears and stuff. I mean, I'm not saying, you know, I mean, you put the body under that sort of stress, but it seems like you're always hearing about bodybuilders tearing pecs, and they're doing it with like 225. They're not doing it with 600, 700 pounds. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, I think there's something to be said about that, you know, that spending some time doing specific work for the tendons and the connective tissues is really important. And the different ways to do that, I think, are isometrics, really heavy supports and heavy loading, and then the really light exercises, the single joint exercises done for very high reps with de-emphasize the eccentric. You know, we're not trying to get a burn in the muscle. We're trying to pump fluid into the joints, and that can be done with, like, you know, leg curls, bicep curls, tricep push downs, you know, shoulder rotation exercises, you know, any sort of single joint exercise that you can do in a fairly quick clip that's going to help increase, you know, banded good mornings are one of my favorites for the lower back, in addition to reverse hyperextensions and things like that. But there's there's so many great things that you can do to increase joint integrity.
Particular for the shoulders? Because if someone's doing a lot of double overhand bending where they're in this position and if they're doing a lot, maybe 7-inch bar or whatever, they're really opening up their shoulders and then coming down hard onto it. What kind of joint integrity?
Light pressing with bands, with dumbbells, you know, reverse band presses, things that de-emphasize the muscular stress that can pump a lot of fluid into those connective tissues are good for the high rep exercises. And then the other thing are your isometrics. You know, work those contractions in the various positions that you're going to be using when you're doing those bends. So, you know, make it very specific to the movement itself. Look at the position that the shoulder's in, and then the range of motion that it's going to go through for the bend. Work isometrics at all those positions. You know what I'm saying? And contract the muscle and hold it, you know, against, you know, something immovable where you can create maximal force. And the other thing about isometrics is because there's no tissue glide, you don't get sore from it. You know, that's why they use isometrics a lot in the rehabilitative settings, because you're just, you know, you're firing a muscle, but there's no tissue glide. Like if I do a bicep curl, my bicep flexes and it extends. But if I take a bar and I curl it into a power rack, I'm only contracting for that position that the elbow's in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So you just don't get sore from it. So it's another great thing to do, particularly if you're in like you're rolling into a competition or you're trying to minimize stress and, you know, things like that. It's a form of training where you can get a lot of benefits without a lot of the negatives, you know, of heavier loading. So
yeah, no, the isometrics come up almost every show. It's totally blew my mind. Like people have turned me on to Bud Jeffrey's stuff about isometrics, and I think we talked about Steve Eusta, or I can't remember how you pronounce his name, but totally wild stuff. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of stuff to it, and it's underutilized. I mean, most people aren't training that stuff, so that's really cool.
It's not cool, man. You can't post an awesome video on on Instagram of a massive deadlift or something like that. You know, nobody wants to see you pull a bar into some pins and grunt for 5 seconds. So.
Yeah, that would be funny though. Start an isometric Instagram.
I already have so few people following me. I'll lose everybody if I do that.
Yeah. So another struggle that a lot of guys have is, especially say guys that are coming over from jiu-jitsu like myself. From playing butterfly guard, seated butterfly guard, you know, for most of my jiu-jitsu career, once I started getting decent, I have this posture, even though I'm not like a guy working at a desk. I have a posture of someone who has that. So when I discovered double overhand bending, it was really hard for me to get a 7-inch bar into position because I couldn't open up my back like that and my chest
Yeah.
like that. So, and that's something I hear, especially guys around my height or shorter. So I'm 5'7", and anybody shorter, they actually find that 6-inch bars are easier because it's just less that we're having to open up for that. So some people told me like face pulls with bands. I'd just like to know what kind of stuff you would recommend for
Upper back exercises like that, the face pulls and stuff
Okay.
like that are great. Any sort of scapular retraction exercise, any sort of external rotation is good. Building the external rotators are often neglected. You've got two positions, elbow out to the side and elbow about 45 degrees from the body are both, they emphasize the two different external rotators. Excuse me. You also have to, you got to get some flexibility work in there, because one of the things that jujitsu does is promotes a lot of muscular imbalance because, our optimal position is to be curled up. We don't want to be extended and flat on our back. We want elbows in tight. We want the shoulders hunched over. We want the upper back rounded over. We want those knees up, whether you're playing butterfly guard or, as I've found, playing closed guard is really rough on the adductors. I've been dealing with some bilateral medial knee pain from playing close guard incorrectly, and not just controlling people, but trying to squeeze them, the thighs, the adductors are fried, so I've had some medial knee pain I've been dealing with. The groin gets tight, the lower abdominals are tight. So doing things like cobra stretches, kneeling hip flexor stretches, straddle, splits and those sort of stretches are really important. So stretching the pecs, stretching the internal rotators. I just like, the ability to hold a straight bar in the squat is almost gone for me. I can't even do that. I'm not even a super heavyweight and my hands are out on the collars on a straight bar. So the only way I can get my hands on a bar is to use my buffalo bar, that's got that, it's got that wider, it's a wider bar with a camber on it. And I see that a lot with jujitsu people, the shoulders do take a beating. And I have, my job when I'm working with somebody isn't to turn them into a power lifter. It's how can I get them to squat that's not going to negatively impact their jujitsu, and I come under fire. I get, people talk smack all the time about, oh, he's doing sumo deadlifts or they're doing, block pulls or they're doing, box squats or they're, he's not using a straight bar. He's using the belt squat or something. It's like, I got to find, it doesn't matter if my powerlifters or my jujitsu guys are squatting to depth. All I got to do is get their legs really strong. And if that means I'm putting them on the belt squat, then they're getting on the belt squat. We got to look at training economy. They've only got, 2 to 4 hours in the gym of non-specific training. I can't train them like I would train a weightlifter or a power lifter or something like that. So I've got to find a way to get them strong in a short period of time, so I got to do what works best for their body while trying to work through the greatest possible range of motion without exacerbating injuries and things like that. So everybody I work with isn't always in an ideal situation, so we will address those things, but I couldn't care less if they're squatting with a safety bar and a belt squat, a buffalo bar, or a straight bar. If they can't hold a straight bar, screw it. We're not going to do a straight bar. That's why I have a safety bar. So I got a buffalo bar. So I got a camber bar. So I got a belt squat, So I think there comes this, there's this kind of purist attitude that all you need is bench, squat, deadlift, and overhead press, okay, we might need to work in a little gray area there. Maybe it's got to be with a parallel grip bar, or maybe it's got to be with kettlebells, or maybe, we got to find a way to work with somebody's personal physical constitution as well, and try to get those joints as healthy as possible. Because ultimately, when it comes to strength training, we're just trying not to screw anybody up,
Yeah, right. So how about you're dealing with jiu-jitsu guys that are going hard a lot of days a week, right? And we're also talking to the bending community here, which maybe 2 to 3 times a week, they're pushing themselves past their limits to try to bend some new bar. Let's talk about recovery. What should we be doing? What do you recommend? How do we keep from burning out? Because we said before we started the show, I keep making the same mistakes where I'll just like go hard and just like let my mental toughness like make my body pay for it, right? And then I'm sad and depressed and grumpy to my wife because I can't even do the thing that's making me
Yep.
happy because I pushed it too hard, you know?
It's
Um,
it's so recovery and restoration is so it's so talked about nowadays, but it's the most underutilized strategy of physical development. And I'm kind of suffering from it right now too, because I'm in the gym all day. You know, I do jujitsu in the mornings twice a week, at night once a week, get some open mats and stuff like that. Just even like last Tuesday, Chris had got done lifting with Jim, another guy we train with, and Chris is like, and I just gotten done eating. Chris is like, come on, Scott, let's roll. And I'm like, and I'm never going to say no to my teacher
Yeah.
or say no to a roll, because
Sure.
that's not cool, So it's like we rolled and I almost threw up, and
Oh, yeah.
my throat's killing me because he got a nasty choke on me and stuff like that. But it's like we don't like, it's cool to talk about giving yourself time to rest and time to recover. And it's so cool to say, okay, just go in and drill and don't roll. How does that work out?
Yeah.
Well, let me know. Let me know when you go to your academy
I've
and you
never done
drill
it.
for 20 minutes and then you're like, all right, man, I'm going to sit out the rolling.
Yep.
You're not going to do that.
Yep.
They're never going to let you hear the end of it. One, two, and then you're going to be like, okay, well, I'm just going to flow today. We're going to take it easy. And then it turns into a brawl,
Yeah.
and that's the problem is unless we have the personal wherewithal to really control and dictate what we do in the roles. And that comes down to us, and my problem is I train too hard. I don't back off, I never miss my lifts. And now, like this last week, I started feeling kind of under the weather on Saturday, a couple bad chokes, my throat's killing me. Some late nights, not good sleep, kind of run down. So now for the last couple of days, I feel like my body's been kind of fighting something. And it's like, look, man, if you don't take some time off, your body's going to make you take some time off. And I'm as guilty of that as everybody. So I think some of the things that like I felt guilty about missing jujitsu this morning, but it's like, if I go, it's going to be stupid. I'm just going to run myself into the ground, So, going into the holidays, I think I may just kind of take this week off, cut back on the lifting a little bit, get some extra sleep, stretch, get some good food this week and stuff like that. And those are the things that you really need to focus on, all the things that you can do to enhance recovery. Sleep. Are you getting enough optimal, consistent sleep? Are you getting enough hydration? Are you getting enough calories to sustain your activity? Are the calories not all coming from junk food, but are you getting some good, high quality nutrients from the foods that you're eating? Are you doing things like stretching? Are you doing some massage or some self massage, or, you got a Theragun or something like that? Or, are you doing some rolling? Are you, making an appointment with a massage there? There's different things that you can do for body work. Are you trying things like the contrast showers, the ice baths, the alternating hot and cold, are you using some, Tiger Balm when you need it? There's so many things that you can do. Are you just taking a deload? Are you doing some light workouts? Are you going for a brisk hike and, maybe doing a few sets of kettlebell swings and calling it a day, all these things, you need to do. And I think if you don't plan those things, your body's going to make you take the time off. And that's bad because that's when you get sick. That's when you're in a bad mood. And when you get into those types of situations, you start to make worse decisions. You get mad. I just need to go train harder next time. And you get into this really bad spiral of, oh, I just need to be tougher. You might go watch a Jocko motivational video and be like, well, Jocko doesn't sleep and he's up at 4:30 every day. And, it's like, yeah, that's not the best way to live. It's motivational, but it's better to get sleep. It's better to allow your body to recover. It's better to, not everybody's an adrenaline type like that, and the guy show, he's had a hard life, you can tell by looking, he's a tough son of a bitch, but he's also, you can tell he's putting his body through the ringer and, hey, props to him, man. I'm scared to death of the guy, but, but, that's not going to work for everybody, and it's great to use that kind of stuff for motivation. But unless you truly are Jocko Willink or David Goggins, use those guys for inspiration, but don't try to model. They've developed the mindset to endure what they endure. They're freaking Navy SEALs, If you're a regular dude who's doing jujitsu 3 times a week and you've got a family to support and you got to go to the office and, you got to work and you got to make money, getting up at 4:30 a.m. and killing yourself every day might not be the best thing to do. You might need to reprioritize some things. So I think, the personal things that you can do to boost recovery and restoration are good, adequate sleep, good body work, things like stretching, mobility, massage, body work type things, and then nutrition, making sure you're getting high quality macro and micronutrients through a mostly whole food diet, and you're getting plenty of hydration, my buddy Jack Reep, who is he's always been my strength. You want some great reading, look up the articles he wrote on T Nation years and years back. He's been my strength consigliere, just an awesome guy. Jack always used to say, you're only 5 good meals and 8 hours sleep away from being recovered, no matter where you're at, and it's,
Wow.
point being, slam some good calories, drink a lot of water and get a good night's sleep and see how good you feel the next day.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I just thought of this actually while you're talking. That's all really good stuff. Mutual, well, I haven't met him, but I definitely look up to him, and I plan to train with him eventually. Sean Doherty, he was on
Man,
the Grappling Central podcast.
my dude, man, he's such a good guy.
He said something that like meant so much for me to hear, and I think it's like valuable for everybody to hear. It's like, the way I talk to myself, right, is like I don't cut myself any slack. Like,
Yeah.
and no one I would train in jujitsu, or if I was like helping somebody out getting started bending or something, I would never treat anyone the way that I like treat myself in my mind, right? It's like if someone was like, no, I'm not really feeling that last rep, like, and if I saw that they meant it, I'd be like, no, just put it down, like that's all good, like don't worry about it. But in my mind, it's like, do it or you're fucking dead. Like,
Yep.
like, and it's like, why do I hold myself to some other standard that I wouldn't like hold someone to, like,
Mhm.
and Sean was talking about that as far as like ego and everything. And I think it's just so valuable that like really like changed the way I'm trying to think about that, because obviously without jujitsu, over the past 10 months or whatever it's been, like that's been a recurring theme. It's just like push, 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 get broken off or injured somehow, recover, bummed, get back to it, push, 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 like,
Yeah.
and that's just because I'm not treating myself like I would someone else.
And how far of a setback is that when you do that too? Are you really, is it really enhancing your training time, or is it better to maybe once or twice you go pretty hard that week, but then you back off a little bit, maybe you do a little bit more technique, or maybe when you roll, you set like a goal for yourself, like, okay, I'm gonna let the guy pass the side control, I'm gonna work on my side control, and that's all I'm gonna focus on in this roll. And
Yeah.
if he submits me, fine, I give him the tap, and we go again. Or
Yeah.
if I escape and I do the thing I want to do, I recover or I sweep, then we reset and we go again. What's wrong? And I mean, you think about it like that too, that's probably a better way to train, because now you're working on something really specific in a real life scenario, which is what's so valuable about jujitsu, is because we do roll all the time.
Yeah.
But it's not just going in and having a battle royal, and just turning it into like the world championships.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I mean, at my age, man, I can't do that stuff. I'm gonna be 46,
Yeah.
and it's like my body doesn't recover from that stuff, man. I
Yeah.
see younger guys than me in jujitsu that are worse off. It's like,
Yeah.
I want to do this stuff. Like I said, I'm not a jujitsu guy. I'm not a jujitero or whatever, but I found the martial art that I really enjoy training, and I want
Sure.
to train it. I mean, I'd love to train it up until I die. I
Yeah.
mean, there's things that I want to do. I want to be active every day. I
Yep.
want to practice Tai Chi every day for the rest of my life. I
Yep.
want to lift weights every day for the rest of my, I don't want to, so it's not about competing, and it's not about, being the best. That ship has long since sailed. But if I can, participate in these things that make me a better me, that's the essence of what martial arts and physical culture is all about.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you got the sport competitors and you got the fighters, and but that's not the bulk of the people that participate in these things. And we got to find a way to do it more sensibly and do it for the long term.
Yeah.
I don't want to blow out a shoulder or a knee and be screwed and not be able to train because, I was going balls to the wall,
Yep. Yeah, playing the long game, that keeps coming up. Like I had Carl Donati on the other night, and he's been actively bending. You might have actually crossed paths with him because he's from Pittsburgh area, but I think
Oh
he's
yeah.
trained with some of the West Side guys off and
Yeah.
on. But he's been actively bending 10, 12 years now, and you really don't hear that. Like there seems to be a sport where guys get in, make some noise and then break themselves off and are gone, or they just get over it or whatever. I haven't spoke to too many people that have been actively doing. Some people come in, do some stuff, take a long break, then come back or whatever. But
Yeah,
Carl's one of the few guys that have actually just sustained a certain level for over a decade, which is just super impressive. And
that is
he was
impressive.
he was talking about it. He's like, man, you got to just like, you can't be hitting bending bars you never have before every session. Like you got to just picture doing this like down the future. You can't just go so hard that you just like break yourself off. It's like
Ed Cohn, who is, you know, arguably the greatest powerlifter in the history of sport, he had a hell of a career. I mean, you know, you want to talk about longevity. I think he was at the top of the game for damn near 30 years, like 28 years or something like that. And just the greatest. I think the one guy in the sport that everybody would agree is the greatest, you know, and has just some amazing lifts. And when you look at the time frame and the equipment that he conducted them, I mean, just a insane guy. And he always used to say that you've only got so many maximal attempts in your body, you know, in
wow.
your lifetime. Do you want to cash them in during your training session, or do you want to cash them in at the world championships? You
Totally.
know, and I mean, it's like you got to pick those. You max out in the contest, and in training you train, you know, and
Yeah.
and you don't like even Louis, you know, West Side's an intense place. And I think like Louis says a lot of stuff that actually doesn't happen there, because it's a I don't know, like I know back in the day, if you listen to guys like Dave Tate talk about the old days when Chuck Vogelpohl and Dave and all, you know, Louis they were all training.
Yeah.
It was like you're going to push the limit every single day, and it's a contest every time you're in there. And those guys, they're all beat up now, you know, they got a lot of injuries. But Louis did have a lot of longevity for powerlifting, and he always talks about training optimally, not maximally, you know,
Yeah.
and making sure that you're acclimating to the training, that you're giving your body time to adapt and stuff like that. And he always talks about, you know, the plan in training is to just break that lift by 5 pounds, you know, save it for the meet, save it for the meet. Don't always take your dying last breath. And when you listen to people like him and you listen to people like Ed, you know, and they talk about not training on the nerve. You know, Louis always made a distinction between the competition max and the training max. And the competition max is when you're amping yourself up, you're hitting the smelling salts, your adrenaline, you know, you're walking out on the platform, it's in a contest. The training max you're supposed to do not in a state of high excitation. You know, you just want to do it calm, collected. You know, you walk out to the bar, hey, we're going to get this, you know, but you're not bouncing your head off the bar and hitting the ammonia and all that kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I always like that, you know, differentiating between the training max
Yeah.
and the competition max. And you even see it with guys like Jim Wendler, you know, in his 5-through-1 program.
Yeah.
You know, he talks about the training max. You know, you pick whatever you figure out what your max is, and then you take 90% of that, and then you base your training weights on that. You know,
Yeah.
this idea of start too light. And there's a lot of wisdom in that simplicity that those guys are talking about. And what they're talking about is the long game. You know, and you see a lot of these new guys that come into powerlifting and stuff like that. They're flash in the pan. They come out of nowhere, they're deadlifting 800 pounds, then boom, they're gone, you
Yeah.
know? And it's like,
Yeah.
because they're training, they're deadlifting 5 times a week. And, you know, all this, you know, I mean, it's like, yeah, you're going to get strong fast, but you're going to cash your body in fast too, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Nah, man. What something you just said, like it's these little tidbits that makes me love doing this show. Is like what you said about you only have X amount of like max attempts at like only so many miles you can put on the car or whatever. Like that, I hadn't really thought about that, and it's like I'm gonna keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I mean, I think stuff like that in jujitsu too happens like naturally though as you get more experienced. Because you know when I train with the upper belt guys, it's like playing. It'd be like playing racquetball with somebody who's really good at racquetball. I'm the one running all over the court. You,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So when I roll with somebody who's experienced, they're exerting like almost no effort, but I'm dying trying to work around them and try to
Yep.
fight them off and try to, you know, whatever. So that's, you know, it's something that comes with experience and time, you know, and technique and stuff like that. So I think in a sport like jujitsu, that stuff kind of naturally happens. you know, and like when you look at, like when I look at my purple belt, brown belt, black belt, you know, people that I've trained with, they're not they're not crawling off the mats at the end of a session like some of us are sometimes. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? So because you can't roll all out. You know, you've got to conserve. You got to learn to conserve energy, or else you're just going to cash yourself in really really fast. You know.
Yeah, that was a realization I had. I might have messaged you about it, but it was just like I was getting frustrated with the lifting and the bending and stuff. Like it just, like I said, taxing my body or whatever. And it was like, why could I could do jujitsu twice a day, every day, and never have an issue, you know, like unless I really was doing some crazy hard rounds or
Yeah.
whatever, I could train every day and it wasn't a thing. And then I was like, oh, it like
But
kind of clicked to
now it
me.
is. But think about back when you were a white belt and a blue
Yeah.
belt. You know, I mean, sure, it was a different story, right?
Well, yeah, the thing that clicked was like, one, I have like over a decade training, and
Yep.
two, that's not competition style rolling night after
Exactly.
night, you know.
Yep.
When I'm lifting and doing the bending thing, that's one, I'm inexperienced at both, like, and two, I'm pushing myself hard, so it's like it's taxing me way more. And I was like, oh, that's why like I could do jujitsu every night, but I can't bend like 2 nights in a row if I
Yeah.
just like it's just too much, you know. It's just funny how you get acclimated to certain things. But
Yeah.
so what's a normal training week looking like for you these days? You said you're training jujitsu 3 days a week.
Yeah.
What's
This
the
week's
lifting
looking pretty
schedule?
light. This week's looking pretty light, thankfully. But typically on Sundays, I mean, this is with everything coming together in a normal week for me.
Yep.
On Sundays, I usually drill with one of my training partners, this guy Jim Sangston, who he started out powerlifting with me, and then he actually got into jujitsu a little bit before I did, and he started at the school that Chris, my teacher, goes
Nice.
to, Creighton MMA,
Yep.
and then he switched over to Nucleus when Chris opened up, and so usually we'll drill for about 45 minutes or so. You know, we'll just pick a few different techniques and we'll just kind of work on them. No rolling, you know, we just kind of,
Yep.
he's been dealing with a knee injury and he's kind of getting back into training. So it's a good opportunity for us to kind of refine some skills and work on some stuff like that. And then we'll hit a lift. I usually do some sort of upper body training on Sundays. It's usually centered around the overhead press and accessories and things like that.
Nice.
Monday morning is our regular no-gi jujitsu class, so we do that at 6:30 in the morning, and then I usually train at 7:30 or 8, depending on whenever I recover. And that's usually my squat day, you know, so I'll usually do some sort of squat training.
Cool.
Tuesdays I'll do some sort of aerobic training, you know, I'll do whether it's like rucking with a weight vest or dragging a sled, or I might go do some hill sprints or something like that, you know, but usually it's more aerobic
Yep.
training just to help with recovery and to help build aerobic capacity.
Nice.
Wednesday morning is our gi jujitsu class. So we'll do jujitsu at 6:30. Then again, I'll train somewhere about 7:30 or 8. And that's usually more of a bench press centered workout, you know, do another upper body session. Thursday, we usually have an open mat. So usually do a little extra no gi work with whoever wants to show up. And then I'll try to do a little bit of aerobic training that day. Friday, I usually do the evening gi class. It's also my deadlift day. And then Saturdays are usually totally off for me.
Okay.
In addition to that, I try to do a lot of stretching and mobility whenever I can. I study and I teach Tai Chi. So I teach a couple times a week and I practice Tai Chi and Qigong daily, which is great, especially from the restorative standpoint. I think it's a great practice. You know, just the breathing and the stretching associated with the Qigong is great. It's good for just kind of centering and bringing your attention, you know, into the to the present moment and stuff. So it's a great solo practice that I really like. I do a little bit of yoga periodically and stuff like that, but you know, I'm trying to get a little bit more into things that promote longevity and things like that to balance out some of the
Right.
heavier, more intense training, you know, that I do. So I mean, it's a lot crammed into a week, but it's really I try to make it as minimalistic and simplistic as possible.
Yep. Nice. And so one thing that I keep asking everybody about, because as I mentioned before we got on the call, was uh, so much body tension is needed with bending. Like some people talk about leaks, like power leaks and stuff like that. And that's like, as I said, I think training myself to not panic, getting trapped underneath people and side control and everything.
Yeah.
I've really struggled with the ability to create and then maintain body tension. My instinct is 100%, even if I have a bunch of weight on my back or I'm pulling a bunch of weight off the floor or whatever, my instinct is to stay pretty loose, I think because of
Yeah.
the conditioning of jujitsu, knowing that if I'm tense the whole time, I'm going to gas out and just not be able to continue. So with all these guys that are bending big stuff, what's some cues that you could give as far as how to create better body tension?
There's things that, and I can't take credit for any of this. I mean, it's come from people like, I think one of the guys who really brought tension more to the kind of the mainstream was Pavel Tsatsouline, and his book Power to the People was one of my favorite books. It wasn't even his kettlebell book, it was just this simplistic like deadlift side press program. I in some aspects I really like the uber simplistic stuff, but I also like a little bit more, it's like I want to throw some chin ups in there and I want to throw some one arm rows in there and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I like his idea of we're going to do fewer things better. We're going to do these few things really, really well. One of the things that he talks about in that book, Power to the People, are different types of tension principles. He talks about like the process of like hyper ear radiation and things like that. Some of the things, that he talks about in that book that I think are really valuable are just the increasing tension, like from the grip. Like if you're going to, I think in the book he talks about like, if you pick up a pencil, and you curl it, there's almost no muscle activation. But if you grab your vacuum cleaner and you try to curl it instantly, your forearm tightens up, your bicep tightens up, you're naturally going to use more muscle tension. So what we want to do when we lift a weight, whether it's light or heavy, we want to lift the light weights like they're heavy. We want to crush the grip. We want to crush the dumbbell grip or the bar. We want to let that tension spread from the forearm into the bicep, the shoulder, the chest, so when we do a deadlift, we're making every single thing in the body tight. We're squeezing the glutes, we're bracing the abs, we're taking that breath and pressurizing and building up the intra-abdominal pressure. And it's a skill that needs to be developed just like everything else, but it's simply like, for somebody who doesn't know how to get tense, have somebody punch you in the gut and see what you do. You naturally brace, think about that. If you go to slap yourself in the stomach, you just naturally tense up. Well, what we want to do is we want to take a breath. We want to close the glottis. We want to squeeze the glutes, kind of graphic, but pull up on the sphincter, squeeze the glutes, brace the abs really. We want to brace the abs tight. We don't want to suck them in. We don't want to blow them out. We want to push into them, and allow that tension to increase in the intra-abdominal cavity. That's going to help protect the spine and stabilize the torso. It's also a power conduit. As we go to lift something, the power is going to drive through the legs, through that tense torso into the implement that we're lifting. If we're weak anywhere in there, we're kind of like leaking power. They refer to it as a power leakage. So just those things like squeezing the daylights out of whatever it is that you're trying to lift, and then that learning to internally pressurize the abdomen, squeezing the glutes, locking everything down there, bracing the abs and all that kind of stuff. That's the stuff that's going to make you stronger. The more rigid that you can be, the stronger you're going to be, because you're not going to have as many power leakages throughout your body. So it's just naturally learning how to get tense. And you've got, one of the best ways to do it is you got to treat the light weights like they're heavy. If you're warming up for a 400-pound deadlift, lift that 135 like it's 4. Don't neglect it, even though you can walk up to it and probably pick it up one-handed while talking to somebody over your shoulder. No, get down, grip the bar, crush the grip, lock the elbows, suck in the air, close the glottis, brace the abs, squeeze the glutes, leverage yourself down, compress the springs, take advantage of those light sets so that you know how to do it when you do the heavier lifts. And just like anything else, it's skill acquisition,
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, that's good. I like the idea of lifting the light weights like they're heavy. I think I'd like known that, but it's just like so many things, like I forget to do that,
Yeah. Well, you see it in the gym, people get hurt bending over to pick up a 45-pound plate, not when they deadlift 405.
Right. Yeah. So we're starting to wrap it up. We're going to do the rapid fire series of questions. I call them medley. We're going to alter it a little bit because Scott is more of a lifter than a bender. So
that's a stretch, but I appreciate it.
So let's see. What's your favorite lift? You're a deadlift guy, right?
Deadlift. Yeah, deadlift.
Awesome. What's the hardest lift for you?
Overhead press.
All right. And let's see. What's something outside of training, bending, strength sports entirely that you enjoy doing?
I don't do it enough, but playing drums.
Nice.
I was a rock star in a previous life, so.
Awesome. All right. What's the one? All right. Yeah. What's the one lift that's gotten away so far? What's something that you've tried and just haven't been able to achieve?
Bench press.
What bench?
The bench, I just suck at it.
Oh no. So like
Oh, you mean my elusive lift?
Yeah.
The one that I tried, 500-pound squat.
Okay, nice.
Yep. Yeah. I 485, but every time I tried 500, it just beat my ass. And finally I was like, I'm done. Yeah. But the bench press just totally sucks for me. So
yeah.
my best bench, I think, was 315. Yeah, it's nothing to write home about. So
Gotcha. I just had I think I sent you some of his stuff. James Fuller, Strongman Archaeology. He's
yeah.
way into the old time lifts, and he was talking a lot about like pullover and presses. You ever train any of that stuff?
I never got into the bridging and stuff like that, like the
Uh-huh.
weighted bridging and stuff, but that stuff is so cool, man. And that's the kind of stuff that, we talked about earlier, from the physical culture world and stuff like that. Like you see the value for that with wrestlers and grapplers because of the way it works the entire spine from top to bottom and, puts you into a position, that you need to get strong in that you're going to encounter, when you're wrestling. So.
All right, here's one. This one throws everybody, but just don't overthink it. So, who's the strongest person you know? This could be somebody. This could be world's strongest man type stuff. This could be your grandpa. This could be some guy from your town. Doesn't matter.
It's a really good question.
All right, and if you can't think of one guy, you can just pick one of the strong dudes that you know and just give them a little shine today.
Yeah, the strongest guy that I know. I know people who are strong for different reasons, I've got a friend, Brian, who I think I talked a little bit about him earlier. He and his wife, they were training with me back in the day. She was the graphic designer at Fight Magazine and they started training with me. He is just one of these guys that the first time he tried to squat, he's like, put 300 on the bar, and he squatted it. He's just one of those guys that he just gravitates towards strength. He's one of the hardest workers I've ever met. And he's so doesn't toot his own horn. He's barely on social media. He loves it and does it himself. And it's just like every time I talk to him, he's progressed by like leaps and bounds, and he still feels it necessary to get my feedback and my critiques and stuff. I'm like, dude, you are so far ahead of me, man.
Wow.
But it's always so he's one of those guys that just shocks you every time you talk to him, so that's kind of cool. But I mean, there's so many people that persevere with shit that lifting doesn't matter when you look at what people are dealing with in their lives and getting shit done. So there's tons of people that inspire me and that make me like I got nothing to complain about.
Yeah, no doubt. You told me a story, I think it was your kettlebell coach kinked a red nail, right? He kinked a red nail like first night. He touched one.
Ridiculously strong. I watched him clean and jerk 132-pound kettlebell, like 50 reps at the Arnold Classic. And Brian Schoenfeld, who's like a legit like strongman competitor, like peers of the Gillinghams, he got like 18 reps, and Fedorenko's like $175, $180, Schoenfeld's like 330, Fedorenko, there's this story about him walking up to the Gillingham's booth at the Arnold one year before anybody really knew he was like a kettlebell lifting world champion and all this stuff. And he saw the inch dumbbell and he's like, what's this? And they're like, oh, this is the inch dumbbell, if you could put it overhead, that's amazing. But, we just want to see people try to deadlift it.
Yeah.
And he goes, wait, let me see. He's like, put overhead like this. And he cleans it and he jerks it and he just misses the lockout and he drops it. And they're just like, holy crap, who is it? And he walks away. He's like, He's like, very interesting, you know, and it's just like, it's like he looks like a hockey player, you know. I mean, he's got a big butt and big legs and no upper body.
Yeah.
And it's just, he's got some of the most amazing strength. You know, when he was down at my gym, I had like a 265-pound stone or something like that, like a river stone that we went down and got, and I had it sitting on a tire in my gym, and we were getting ready to go to dinner, and he walks by. He's in jeans and a t-shirt, you know, and he's like, well, why stone in here, you know? And I'm like, oh, we lift stones. He's like, how do you do, you know? And I pick it up, I lap it, you know, I hook it, I roll it up to my chest, and I pop it on my shoulder. I'm like, you know, and I set it down, and he looks at it a couple times, he sizes it up, and it's kind of a longer, you know, stone. And instead of deadlifting it like I did in my lap, he picks it up kind of lengthwise at the base and the head of it. And he's like, would this not be easier? And he like swings it between his legs like a kettlebell, and he throws it onto his shoulder. And I'm like,
Whoa.
yeah, that would be easier, you know, sure. Yeah, there you go. And that's, you know, that was the same weekend that I showed him the nails, and he bent a blue and he kinked the red. I mean, it's just like, you know, he could one arm deadlift, I think like, was it 315 or, yeah, I mean, the guy's just got sick strength. It's just, and he's so unassuming because, like I said, he's built like a hockey player.
Yeah. Wow.
But he was also the world champion in kettlebell sport. He held the biathlon record for something like a decade. And that was, you know, he was a 70 kilo lifter, I think. And like even the super heavyweights couldn't break his total. Yeah, he's a bad dude. Yeah, he's such a cool guy. And he's so Russian, man. I love just talking to him because his sense of humor is like so dry and non-existent, and nothing impresses the guy. It's like, hey, I got first place. He's like, well, why did you not win 2 medals? You know, it's just like nothing you could do is ever good enough, you know?
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. All right. Last question is best piece of advice you were ever given. This could be about lifting or life in general or anything.
Probably like as it pertains to, probably because what I am first and foremost is like a businessman, you know. I mean, all this stuff is, it really, I do it because it's my job, that I'm fortunate, you know, even though I complain about it a lot, you know, I'm really lucky to do what I do. One of the best pieces of advice I was given was, you and your accomplishments mean absolute shit when it comes to your business and what you're trying to do. And this is one of the things that I struggle with when I look at these people who are trying to be insta famous, or this younger crop of trainers that they're wanting to, you know, they're wanting to become, you know, insta famous fitness celebrities and stuff like that. It's like, people don't care about you. What they care about is what can you do for them, you know? And I mean, it's like, you know, you follow me on social media, and you'll notice, particularly on my gym page, I very rarely, I usually post about what the people I train are doing, or it's some sort of tip or something like that. I try to create value. What I do really is nothing, you know. I'm a nobody, and I don't mean, and I'm not trying to sound like, you know, I'm not trying to be like self-deprecating or like humble or something like that, but it really doesn't matter. What matters is what I can get other people to do. Because if I can't get people to get stronger than me, to exceed the things that the meager things that I've accomplished, if I can't help people get stronger, perform better, be the best that they can be, I'm a horrible trainer. I'm not good. So the best piece of advice I ever got when it came to like marketing yourself and stuff like that is, your accomplishments mean nothing. It means something to you. You know, I'm very thankful for the things that I've done, but it doesn't matter. You know, what I do doesn't matter. You know, it matters to me. And maybe some people might draw some inspiration from it, but what matters is what the people who come to me and trust me with their development, what I'm able to get them to do. So these people that get into it's very common to get into the fitness industry as a way to try to elevate yourself or try to promote yourself and whatever, you know. I mean, if you got abs, show them off. Maybe I'm just jealous I don't have a 6-pack, but it's really not about you, and it's really about what the people you work with accomplish. And so these people that like hold things back from their students or their athletes, you know, because they're afraid of somebody being, I hate that. It's like, we're here to help each other grow and get better. It's like that's like the approach that I take with jiu-jitsu. Like, I probably never compete. I'm not, you know, it's like I've got 2 roles, and that's to show up and try to make myself better and try to make my training partners better and
Yeah.
try to reflect really well on Chris's business, you know. And I look at like my teacher, Chris, is probably one of the most underrated guys in jiu-jitsu. You've probably heard him on Ryan's podcast, but Chris is not he's not a guy that toots his own horn, and he's insanely good at jiu-jitsu. He's a hell of a competitor. And when you look at like, you know, he's not a spring chicken. He's, you know, when like in 2017, I think he was ranked #1 in the IBJJF. He was killing it in the submission only contests. You know, he's just murdering people, and he does it from such a place of humble professionalism. Like, he never talks about himself. He never talks about his accomplishments. He just shows up and he does the work. And he was one of my favorite people to train because, one, he really proved the point that I was trying to make with training these people. But the other thing is, when I look at the level of dedication and the buy-in that I got from him, the way he trusted me with his training, it's like, if I don't give him that same, you know, that same courtesy, you know, I'm doing him a disservice, you know. And those are the types of people that I really like, and those are the people that I really gravitate to. Those are the people that are out there trying to make the world better for those that are involved in the things that we're involved with. You know, it's not about what you do as much as it is about the people you touch and how positively you can impact their lives, their development. You know, I get more excited when I see my teammates go and win something, or when I see them hit a record lift, or I see them crank a new submission or something like that. You know, I get it. I get just as excited, if not more excited, than when I do that for myself. You know, I mean, that's very rewarding. And I think that's what somebody who's a true coach or a true teacher, they're like that. You know, it's not about them as the teacher. It's about what they can get their students, their clients, and their athletes to accomplish. You know, so ultimately, you know, just that's a long way of saying, it's not about you. You know, it's about what you can do for people. And, you know, we're in this age where we got access to all this great information. So let's learn and let's pass on and let's help each other and let's, you know, support each other. And let's, you know, I mean, that's what building a community is, you know. And there's no reason to be selfish. There's no reason to be, you know, to withhold that. You know, it's like, if I make you better, you're going to make me better, you know. And that's how we both get better, you know.
Yeah, good answer for sure. All right, in closing, who's someone you'd like to see me have on the show?
Oh man, I you know, it's an impossibility. I would say Steve Jack, but you know, the guy's passed. Fortunately, and this guy passed away too. But Eric Fiorello had him on the Motivation and Muscle podcast back in the day. But Eric died tragically this past year as well. Like I said, and if you can go back, anything you can find Steve Jack, absorb it. But I don't. You haven't had John Brookfield on, have you?
No, I actually sent him an email. He got back to me. I need to follow up with that. I definitely love
John
to
would
have
be a great
John on.
guest. I love John. He's the godfather, man. He's the man when it comes to grip strength, when it comes to this kind of stuff. And he is so underrated, because he doesn't pat himself on the back and he doesn't get the accolades that he deserves. So I think the more opportunity that guy gets to tell his story and share his knowledge is very, very important.
I've heard some really cool stories about him. When Adam Glass was on, he told a story about like he was driving down the road and he like held the steering wheel with his knees and bent a 60D behind his head, like driving down the road or something.
So I got a fun story about John and at that Wake Forest strength coaches clinic where he debuted the battling rope system. The morning of the clinic, because we would always get up there the night before, go out to have dinner, you know, have a few beers and stuff like that, then go to the clinic all day, then drive to come back. It's about a 5-hour trip from Atlanta. So my buddy and I that I went up there with, we were we went to IHOP the morning before the workshop, and John Brookfield's sitting there having breakfast. And I'm like, no way, you know. So I go walking over. It's my first time seeing him and dude, his hands are one of the most impressive things you'll ever see. They're literally like mitts, you know. So I walk up to him. I'm like, John, I'm looking really forward to hearing your presentation today. And I put out my hand, and he reaches up to shake my hand, and I give him a little squeeze, and he just smiled like, man, you're not the first. You won't be the last. Here, let me break your hand so I can finish my pancakes. And man, he just clamped down on my hand, and it was like, holy
Oh
crap,
man.
just the sheer power of a guy who's not even trying to do it, who's mid
Yeah.
bite on a pancake, and he just decimates your hand. I mean, the guy is he's such a powerful guy, and he's a friendly, humble, just informative guy with some great stories, and just a really, really cool guy.
Cool. Yeah, I want to get that one for sure. Hopefully that works out. All right, tips and advice for beginning lifters.
Focus on technique. Don't be in a rush to max out. Spend some time letting your tissues adapt. Do the rep work. Build some muscle. Dave Tate always used to say you can't flex bone. So if you don't have muscle, build some muscle first. As uncool as bodybuilding is, we need to have some muscle. It's your body's armor. It's what fires to do these lifts. So there's nothing wrong with getting a little bit bigger as we're trying to get stronger. Then when it comes time to ramp up the weights, save a little bit. Never go to a true, like use that idea of the training max and the competition max. Because if you're just starting out and say you can bench 135 for a set of 10, well, then you start with 135 for a set of 5, and then you add 5 or 10 pounds for a set of 5. You add 5. Well, what you're doing there is you're allowing your tissues to develop. You're allowing things to build in your body. Whereas if you just try to go right to, I don't know, if you do 135 for 10, maybe you can do 185 or 195 for 1. If you go right to that 1 rep max, your joints aren't going to be ready for it. You give your tissues time to adapt. Take it slow. This is something that we want to do for life. So 5 pounds a month is 60 pounds at the end of the year. Take your time, let your body adapt. Don't be in a rush, enjoy the process and play the long game. This isn't a 12-week, this is for life,
Yeah, nice. You know what, actually, I just thought of this just because we've been talking a lot of jiu-jitsu. What, you know who Daniel O'Brien is? Ryan's had him a bunch on the podcast.
The name sounds familiar. Yeah, but
Long-haired dude from like Tennessee or something like that.
Yeah.
Does a lot of really weird jiu-jitsu, but while he was on Ryan's show, he talked about he felt like he was muscling things too much, and he took a year. I think he said at brown belt he decided he wasn't going to tap anyone for a year. He just went and trained and got submitted. Like it had to be legit, right? So he wouldn't just like roll over and let someone like tap him for nothing. But if someone, he would get to a position, he wouldn't muscle anything, and then he wasn't worried about tapping anyone for an entire year. And I just thought that was like such a cool training, and like, and I plays into the idea of playing the long game, and like I did that for like a couple months in my own training, man. And it's just like the ability to like get out of stuff and not muscle stuff, and just like taking that expectation of like the tap out of it did so much for my own training. Like I haven't recommended that in a while to anyone, but anyone should, like, if you're listening to this and you're training jiu-jitsu, just take the next month off from worrying about tapping anybody. Like just train, try not to muscle anything, try to have perfect form. Don't just let anybody tap you, but just like, work into a position, and when they got it, you got it. Don't worry about tapping anybody. It did so much for my jiu-jitsu.
That's a great point. And I mean, I think it's like, something that you struggle with when you're starting something like jiu-jitsu is that competitive aspect. Either you're getting tapped or you're trying to tap, and it's like, no, you're there training. And it finally, like, I had some dark days when I first started out, and you're like, am I ever going to get this? Where you're the new guy on the block, and I got a great training partner, this girl Ruth. She's a brown belt now, but she was a purple belt when I started. She's a 130-pound girl whooping my ass. I mean, it's just like it's humbling. We all go through that, but there's a point where I had one really bad class where I was like, I don't know if this is for me, and I think Chris kind of like sensed it. And I think he came over and he asked me, he's like, how you feeling? I'm like, oh, pretty good, recovering. He's like, no, about jujitsu, and I'm like, there's some days where you get the technique and you feel like, yeah, you're moving really well. Then there's some days you feel like you're like a toddler trying to walk,
Yeah.
He goes, that's jujitsu, man, you know? And then I got this thing. It's like, I just took, and I don't mean in a nonchalant way, but I took this attitude where it was like, fuck it, whatever's going to happen is going to happen, you know, and don't, you know, the taps don't mean anything, you know, it's just training, you know? And when I kind of let go of that, my training got so much better, you know? And now it's like, I mean, you know, I get tapped by everybody. I get tapped by white belts. I get tapped by black belts and you know, everybody taps me. I get tapped by girls, and I get it's not a big deal because we're all training, trying to get better. And, you know, I just kind of took this approach there. You know, if somebody tapped me, they're showing me a weakness in what I'm doing, or they're showing me something I'm missing. You know, I should be happy about that.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't mean anything, you know, nobody's doing backflips and like rubbing your, you know, it's everybody's tapped, you know, and everybody's gonna get tapped, you know, I mean, it's just how it is, you know. And I think when you can let go of that, but you see a lot of people who have this just competitive thing. It's like, I'm going into training to win, you know, and I'm gonna crush that freaking, you know, spaz white belt, and I'm gonna show him what's up. It's like, dude, we're all the spaz white belt, you know, we all got to go through those growing pains, you know. Why don't you try to help that person? You know, why don't you take your experience and try to make them not feel so bad when they get tapped, and say, hey, look, this is part of the growth and stuff. So I really like that concept. Like, forget about the tap, man, work on position, work on technique, that's really cool.
And you can't tell them either.
Right.
That's, you got to keep it to yourself. That's the hard part.
Well, you know, that's the thing. It's like that ultimately, that's all that matters. You know, people's perceptions of things are their perception. And the person that thinks they're going in there and winning, you know, I mean, if they got to go and be like, hey, I tapped Scott, you know, to their family or whatever, then good, man. You know, hopefully that'll give you a good night, you know, if that's what you got to do to get through the night. But I also think that people like that, they don't last too long in something like jujitsu, because jujitsu, it's the truth, man. You know, it exposes you the minute you get on the mat. That's why, you know, I don't want stripes. I don't care about ranks. I'm not doing it for any of that crap. I'm just trying to get better. And you know when you're getting better when you roll. You know,
it's funny because there was a time I remember, like, because I was doing only jiu-jitsu for so long. I had started to dabble a little bit with lifting like the year prior to, like, when we got in contact. But just in the heavy jiu-jitsu days, I was talking to somebody about the gym, and I was like, oh, it must be nice to go to the gym. And, like, I don't think anybody ever goes home from the gym being like, I fucking suck. Like, you know, and now here I am, like, missing lifts and being like, I fucking suck, missing bends, you know. I'm eating my words 100%. Like,
it's the same thing.
The strength stuff exposes you just the same, man.
It does. That's what I think. That's why people like lifting weights, though. I mean, you either, you know, it's that old cliche, you know, Henry Rollins quote from his Details article from '93 or whatever, you know, 200 pounds is 200 pounds, you know, the idea that you either lift it or you don't, you know. It's the great, you know, it's the great equalizer. It's the, you know, it's the great teacher or whatever. And it's true, man. You know, I mean, there's a lot of lessons, just like there's a lot of philosophy in jiu-jitsu mats. There's a lot of philosophy in that pile of iron, you know, in the gym.
Well, especially as personally as you know, as you become an adult, right, and you realize the world is far from black and white, right and wrong. Everything is in the gray area. Like, it's things that are definitive are very attractive, you know. The fact of like harsh consequences of something you can just look at and be like yes or no without question, you know. Even though, like, as we said at the top of the show, it can be painful, like the all the glory and all the heartbreak is on you, you know. But like, that's also really nice in a world that's pretty complicated and getting more complicated.
I'll tell you, I mean, if you ever want to get a little bit away from the grip stuff, and actually he's got a book. I think he's got the book on the Mighty Atom, but Sean would be an interesting guy, Doherty, you know, to get on the show.
Oh yeah.
I mean, because especially if you want to get a little bit more into philosophy and you know, Sean's just such a cool guy, man. He's very intellectual. And like when I was up in Ohio this past summer, and, you know, it's kind of funny how we met. When I was doing the West Side Barbell Special Strength Coach cert, the grappling portion of it, the training for grapplers, it was John Saylor's book. And John is he was national team judo coach, Shingi Tai Jiu-Jitsu. He was Sean's coach for a lot of years. I recognize Sean from John's books and from, you know, from West Side and stuff like that. So I remember John is not on. John's another guy who's so underrated. You know, he needs to be more out there. He's a brilliant guy. His lecture modules were some of the best content I've ever listened to. And when I bought his book, I had posted about it on Instagram, and I'm like, man, if you want a book on training grapplers, this, you know, John Saylor's book is the shit, you know. And I think I hashtag Shingy Tai Jiu Jitsu or something, and then I get this ding. It's like, Sean Doherty, like, I'm like, no way, you know. So I look and I'm like, oh wow, that's Sean, you know. So I sent him a friend request and he took it, and I sent him a message. I'm like, dude, man, I said, thanks, I appreciate it. I said, you know, this is freaking crazy, you know, I'm kind of a fan, you know, blah, blah, blah. So we started talking, and he's just like you and me. We're into the same music. He's into skateboarding, you know, he still goes skateboarding with his son at this. He was telling me about the skate parks up in Ohio to go to and stuff.
Awesome.
So we kind of built this friendship online. And then, you know, when I was going up to Ohio to visit my buddy, I had just mentioned, I said, I'm kind of going to be in your area. He goes, dude, let's train, man. You know, he's like, come on down to, you know, he invited me to his house. He pulled the mats up to his garage. I got all this one-on-one time with him. You know, we had some good Mexican food afterwards. And it's just like, he's one of the most genuine guys. And he's a real martial artist too, you know, and that's what I liked about Ryan's podcast. You know, he talked about the ethical side of the arts, which is something that you tend to lose now that MMA has kind of come front and center, which is awesome.
Definitely.
Because now, you know, you could be a kid and join an MMA gym and learn some real practical fighting skills that will, you know, teach you self-defense and save your butt. But I also don't like how you also lose some of the good things that came along with the traditional martial arts. And even on some level, jiu-jitsu, even though jiu-jitsu tends to be a little bit more relaxed for a pretty traditional art, but still there's things that the traditional arts teach you on the ethical side that get glossed over with today's MMA and stuff like that. And that's what I like about Sean. I mean, he's a modern day warrior, man. He's like a real Musashi, you know, kind of guy, you know, and he's just such a cool dude. And I think from a philosophical standpoint, he's a really interesting guy to chat with. He'd you know, and I know you're a fan of his work and stuff, man. It'd probably be fun for you just to talk with him, man.
Yeah, I was really excited when I saw you guys training together, because right before we got shut down, I was really studying his stuff. I can't remember exactly why I discovered him, but it was through researching leg locks and stuff like that. And I discovered his stuff, and I just could tell he was like a super cool guy. And I was like, oh, got so psyched when I saw you guys training together.
No ego, man. And it was cool. Like, you know, with the leg locks and stuff, he talked about how, you know, he was talking about how John Saylor, when he moved to Japan and trained judo over there, you know, they were doing leg locks and all this stuff back then, you know. I mean, it's so quote unquote new for jiu-jitsu because of the way, you know, Danaher has systematized things and the spin that he's put on it. But that stuff's been around forever, you know. And he's you know, these concepts, you know, that they were there in judo. And that's what I like. He's not married to one thing, you know. Even when we were training, he's like, I'm not going to give you techniques, I'm going to give you concepts, you know. And it really makes you look at jiu-jitsu a little bit differently. And one of my problems being so new to the art is, you know, you think of things in a 3 or a 4 or a 5 step process, you know. Okay, I'm going to control the legs. I'm going to go for the knee cut. I'm going to block the underhook. You know, you're going through the step-by-step thing. And he's like, just think of these concepts, you know, think of pinning the hip, think of closing space, think of creating space, think of creating an angle, you know. And Chris is a lot like that too, you know, and it's like, take these concepts and make them work, you know. Don't just be, you know, have a system to originally learn the stuff, but don't be married to something, you know. Make the concept apply to a multi-directional kind of capacity, you know. And it's really cool when you talk to people like that who, and the guy, like, no ego, man, you know. He no stripes on his black belt, and he's been a black belt forever, you know. The guy, you know, he's like, I don't know, some guy came up to me one day, I think Carlos Catania was the guy that promoted him to a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt. He's like, I trained enough up there. He looked at me, he goes, no, you're a black belt, you know, or what. I'm like, that's so cool, man. You know, especially when people are like fighting for that piece of tape on their belt, you know. And it's like, you know, and I'm not, you know, whatever people's reasons and stuff like that, you know, whatever you know, but whatever keeps you motivated. But, you know, I always like, you know, when we talk about ranks and stuff like that, I'm a big fan of Musashi, and I've read everything. Musashi never talked about ranks. He only talked about the perfect cut, striving for the perfect cut, the technique, the training, you know. And that's what the martial arts is. It's training. It's not what you wear around your waist. And, you know, so and Sean definitely like embodies that philosophy, which is really cool. Good dude. Good dude.
Absolutely. Yeah. Musashi, his quote is, once you understand the way, you see it in all things. Is that him, or is that
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
Because that's something I've been thinking about so much, just like that I was fortunate enough to like pivot all my energy into something else and like feel like I can be successful at that. I feel like that was just I learned the way through jujitsu, you know, like, and just understanding what it takes to be dedicated to something, and like literally going to bed dreaming about it, you know, and then just like like due to circumstance in 2020, like pivoting that over to something and still getting joy out of, you know, something else that you knew were at, but still like apply the same principles, you know.
Yeah.
All right,
Cool, man.
Scott. So where can people find you? Social media.
Yeah, social media. I'm not too active on. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram mostly, and actually LinkedIn. I do a little bit on LinkedIn, but Instagram is probably the busiest. I've got a page for my gym and just my kind of my training. That's at EPTS ATL. My business is Extreme Performance Training Systems. So EPTS is the abbreviation that we use. EPTS ATL is my one Instagram. Then my personal Instagram, if you want to see pictures of my dog and vegan donuts on occasion, is S Shetler 613. That's a little bit more on my personal one. I'm on Facebook if you just look up Scott Shetler, but I'm not super active. I'm really kind of down on social media. It's just kind of more an annoyance. I try to use it to promote my business and the things that I'm doing and stuff. And but you know, other than that's where you can find me. My website is eptsgym.com, and that's where people can go if they're interested. I've self-published a few books, and I actually co-authored a book with Stick from Dead Prez about his process gaining 20 pounds of muscle on a plant-based diet. So that's a really cool book called Eat Plants, Lift Iron. And he was a really cool dude, man. You want to talk about an awesome guy. That whole experience was awesome. And to this
Yeah,
day, it's awesome to call him a good friend of mine.
that's awesome.
But that was a fun project. So I've done some pretty cool things, you know, outside of the strength stuff and all that. But, you know, I mean, I've got my brick and mortar business down here in Atlanta. I like to be in the gym. I love working with people. I am available for some remote coaching and programming if people want. Always more. I love working with jujitsu people on their strength and conditioning programs. So I do a lot of work online with people, which is how you and I kind of hooked up or whatever. But I'm
Yep.
always happy to do some remote programming, ongoing coaching or program design, you know, whatever works for people. And then, like I said, my brick and mortar is down here in the North Atlanta area. We're actually in a town called Norcross. It's actually the home of Nucleus Jiu-Jitsu as well. Chris and I share a facility. So if anybody's ever traveling through the Atlanta, I know things are kind of tight, you know, right now with COVID and all that stuff. But if anybody's ever traveling through Atlanta, they're looking for a place to train. We're a really small private training center. So there's not, you know, we're easy to keep the place cleaned. We've been pretty lucky with no real, you know, outbreaks of COVID out of our facility. We've had a pretty good handle on it. We do a good job at keeping it pretty tidy, and we're still able to do the jujitsu and the strength training and stuff like that. So if anybody's ever coming through the Atlanta area, you're more than welcome to stop in and lift some weights or just hang out or come do some jujitsu and stuff. We always love seeing people come through the door. So
Awesome. All right, Scott, that's it, man. I want to thank you so much. Like
yeah,
I
thank you,
said,
man.
reaching out to you was like something special for 2020 because it really like sparked a lot of things. And like, you know, I've been down in my basement every day probably since, doing some
Yeah.
type of lifting or bending or grip work or whatever. And
Well, dude, your progress on the lifts, like how fast you not only knocked out your goals but exceeded your strength goals that you set was phenomenal. And to see everything that you've pivoted that into, you know, with diving into the grip and the bending, with the podcast that you've put together, with the caliber of people that you've gotten on your show. I mean, everything you've done has been pretty awesome in such a short period of time. So congrats on all that, man. It's really cool.
thank you, man. And I really appreciate that. And I certainly have some more goals to go, especially my back's feeling good again. We're going to get some goals going.
Nice.
All right. That's it, man. I thank you so much and have a great rest of the night.
Thanks, man. You too. Take care.
All right.